Oh my. Welcome everyone. It's really a great honor to be able to put together an event like this, and even more of an honor to meet two new friends, and Jay I've known for a number of years. So without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about each one of these gentlemen. And then when they are invited to speak, they can elaborate on their history and background and what have you. So we'll leave it to you to further your introduction. And sitting at the far end of the table is Mazen Halabi. He grew up in Damascus, Syria. He still has immediate family, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews there. And he is a community activist. And it would be a good question for you to ask him what type of activism he's interested in. In the middle, gentleman I've known for some time and done some work together with him at our legislative offices, Jay Shahidi. Jay has been an international affairs researcher, a public speaker, opinion writer, lobbyist, consultant, and human rights activist since 1968, as well as a business owner since 1977. He has published dozens of opinion articles and given over 1,200 public speeches on social, political issues. He was born in Tehran and is a graduate of the University of Minnesota Mankato. He is a private businessman with a lengthy history of advocacy and representation on a multitude of humanitarian boards. So, welcome, Jay. And finally, we have, sorry, we'll walk on that all together. And finally, Mamoun Slahi. I'm just meeting him as well, so I'm glad that you will get to meet him as well. He was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon. He has a strong family ties and deep connection to the country's history and culture. He is an IT professional specializing in system administration, cloud technologies, and information security. Outside of his career, he is an active member of the Minnesota Palestinian Coalition and other grassroots political groups, passionately advocating for justice in the Middle East, with a focus on Lebanon and Palestine. Now, welcome these three gentlemen. Oh, okay.
Will you be showing this on your website also?
It'll be Tom over here is recording it, and he will put it up on the website. He's a master, so trust that it's going to be good. Okay. We will just begin with Mazen, if you would like to speak for your 15 or 20 minutes, further introducing yourself if you wish, speaking about your country, and then... It's up to you, Jim.
No, that's good.
Okay,
All right.
great.
Yeah, there's no on and off. Just go ahead.
Just speak to it. All right. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Mazen Halabi. As Kathy mentioned, I grew up in Damascus, Syria, and I still have all
Hold
my...
on, can everyone hear that? Let me see if the microphone is on.
It is on.
It is?
Is it on?
There, just hold it closer, I guess.
Better.
And hold it like this rather than this.
Okay.
Hold, yeah.
All right, I'll do that. As I mentioned, my name is Mazen Halabi. I grew up in Damascus, Syria, and I came to the States after high school. Went to school here in Minnesota. This is obviously a well-educated audience about the Middle East, so I hope I don't tell you something that you don't already know. Obviously, the last few weeks have been incredibly exciting for Syria and for the Middle East in terms of the fall of the Assad regime. Sad in so many ways for what's going on to our families in Gaza and the suffering that they've been experiencing for the last 15 months. Grateful that there is finally a ceasefire of some kind, or at least a stop in what's going on in terms of the death and the genocide that's happening there. So what I could tell you about Syria is this was the fall of the Assad regime is a a long time coming, if you will. This did not happen overnight. And many of you know what the Assad regime has done in the country, and a lot of people don't. Some looked at the Assad regime as somebody who supported the Palestinians, somebody who opposed U.S. policies, and looked favorably on it. In terms of what the Assad regime did in the country is a whole different story. And I would tell you how we got to where we are today, outside hopefully the Wikipedia listing, but the Middle East, as we know it, have 22 Arab countries, 8 monarchies, and the rest are republic. The 8 monarchies, 2 are the poor one, Jordan and Morocco, and the 6th rich one on the Gulf. The rest of the Arab countries, they pretty much followed the same path. In 1949, the first military coup happened on a civilian president in Syria and replaced Nur al-Atassi with Salah Jadid, a military officer. And then after that, there's a series of coups that happened, but pretty much the military generals took over the Middle East. And the first thing that they did was establish martial laws. Now, martial laws, when you have a fire in LA, the government needs to be able to control the events. Martial laws in the Middle East suspended the Constitution. And therefore, these military generals became the owner of the country. They could do whatever they wanted. There's no longer a legislative body that can say what they're doing or have any impact on their activity or an oversight is the word that I was looking for. And you look at Syria had Assad, Egypt had Jamal Abdel Nasser, Libya had Gaddafi, Iraq had Saddam Hussein, Sudan had Numeiri, and so on and so forth. They all did the same thing. Suspended the constitution through martial laws, ruled the country with an iron fist. Once they got to power, the objective was no longer the service of the people, but to maintain power. Syria had 18 branches of intelligence services. Assad spent more on those intelligence services than he did on health, infrastructure, education, and any other services that the government had provided. They had one purpose and one purpose only, is to keep them in power. And the same formula applied to Libya, the same formula applied to Iraq, same in Egypt, and you go down the line. What Assad did also started picking up people in terms of the opposition. First, eliminate diversity in political thought. So political parties that existed pre-Assad were being eliminated one after another. His party, the Ba'ath Party, became the ruler of the country, and by decree, within the law, that they are the ruler of the country, the Ba'ath Party. Following the same example as the Communist Party in the Soviet Union and some of the other countries. What Assad also did was literally destroy the civil society. So you can no longer have organizations without permission from the government. You can never get permission to either have a gathering like this one or establish a new organization. So by having a single party, by eliminating or suspending the Constitution, by having intelligence services that had no purpose but to keep him in power, by eliminating the civil society, the opposition started going underground. And thus, you're starting to have oppositions in secret. Because you can't meet in a place as an office place, people started to meet in churches and in mosques, because that's the only person that you can trust to some extent. Thus, the Islamist movements became stronger in terms of their opposition. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very religious, very blue collar. A lot of the opposition came out of our neighborhoods. And there wasn't a household that didn't have a family member that was arrested or disappeared in our neighborhood. And this was not unique to only the blue collar families. Opposition came from all directions. And Assad did not distinguish between one group or another, or one affiliation or another. As long as these people were opposed to him, he basically got rid of them. And so the head of the Communist Party in Syria spent 20-some years of his life in solitary confinement. One of the longest imprisonment of solitary confinement. His first name is Riyadh. When he came out, he started his opposition again, and Assad, the son, threw him back in jail and spent another 5 or 6 years. He died recently. The head of the Democratic Party, Michel Kilo, spent tons of years of his life in prison. So it wasn't just the Islamists or the Christian or the Druze or the communists. Anybody that was opposed to Assad went to prison. Estimated about 30% of the population spent some time in prison. I have 5 brothers. They all make tiles. Every single one of them went to prison. None of them was ever charged. And you see the story happening throughout the country in Syria. Assad's opposition wasn't only to Syria. The myth that he was supportive of the Palestinians is a myth that all of these Arab leaders have used. The Palestinian cause became a tool for them to perpetuate the suffering that they were inflicting on their people. The largest Palestinian camp in Lebanon, Tel Za'atar, Hafez al-Assad eliminated it completely. He killed more Palestinians in Lebanon than Israel did. Not to say either one of them is good. They're both horrible. But just to give you an idea that these dictators did not fight the U.S. or chanted for the Palestinian cause because they believed that this is what they were about. They did it to further suppress the population. When George Bush needed a place in the world to torture prisoners, he sent them to Syria. The policy of rendition happened in Syria, and they sent him to Jordan and he sent him to Egypt. That tells you the condition that the Arab population was living under. When the Arab Spring happened, it didn't happen because of a perpetuated myth that this is a conspiracy that the CIA started it. It happened because the people were suffering. And between 2011, when the Arab Spring happened to oppose Assad, until his falling a month ago, over 1 million Syrians were killed. The first thing that the people are finding today are these mass graves throughout Syria, everywhere. Everywhere. And what I mean by this, they didn't go out to the desert and dug a hole and threw in 10,000 people. Meters from our home in Damascus, they found a mass grave. And I live, or my siblings still live, in pretty close to the old city. That tells you this desire for sustaining power had no limit to what they were planning on doing. And thus, the revolution continued for 14 years. Half the population in Syria became displaced. over 14 million people had lost their home. When you take a look at the picture of the different cities in Syria, it looks like Gaza. And I mean, you're talking about not limited to just areas that had opposition, but throughout the whole country. Throughout the whole country. It's a grim picture, but anybody that got to power and wanted to maintain power and are willing to do whatever it takes to keep them in power, that's the result of it. That's what happened. The Assad family became an organized crime family with the resources of a state at their disposal. They have an air force that they can bomb cities. They have a military that they go and arrest people or kill them. They literally became an organized crime that had that much power. This was not a 20 or 40 guys that were inflicting pain on some community, but they had that much power. I didn't think Assad was going to fall. With the changes that happened in the last few years, where the Arab countries basically felt that, look, this is not going to end. We need to do something and bring them back into the fold, especially since he threatened them with manufacturing of drugs. Captagon became the drug of choice in the Middle East, and the Assad family were the biggest producers. And he threatened the neighboring country. His biggest customers were the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan because of the proximity. They found factories and factories of Captagon, a cheap product. The raw material comes from China and easy to manufacture, and you sell the pill for $20. And that's how, with all the pressures that was being put on them through the sanctions, selling drugs became his source of income, if you will. I don't know what to tell you about the joy of losing Assad, and I'm sorry if I went on for too long here. If you need me to stop, let me know.
You did not go on for too long, and we could keep you going, but we do have two other
Sure.
panels, and we're going to hear more from you, so
Sounds good.
I'm interested to hear about this drug later on. So far, so good? Well, you know what I mean. Jay?
Thank you very much. I especially want to thank Kathy Adam for getting me over here. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Kathy, for getting me here, and thank you all the organizers of this organization. Mazen just described a very touching and sad story what has been happening to the people of not just Syria, but the whole area. And if you look back in history, not too long, about 100 years, 120 years, most of Middle East or Western Asia was a colony of Ottoman Empire for some 400 years. And who defeated Ottoman Empire and kicked them out during World War I, during and immediately after World War I? The British. The British took over the Arab countries of the Middle East or West Asia and basically took the provinces of the Ottoman Empire, including Syria, and turned them into a country, right in the middle of the tribes. They did that in Afghanistan, in African countries, all over. The idea was divide and conquer. That was part of the British colonial policy, divide and conquer. So Syria and Lebanon were divided. And to make the British wanted to make the French happy after they had defeated the French during Napoleonic Wars, because, you know, France was a second power, colonial power. So the British said, oh, we'll give Syria and Lebanon to French, just to make them happy. because they were inheriting a large area and would be very expensive, and they needed a lot of troops to control it. So if you go back to 1917, they took over that area. However, as part of the Middle East, he explained well, most of them are Arab countries, or considered Arab countries by historians and anthropologists. However, there are a couple of fairly large, relatively large countries in the area, Turkey and Iran, which are not considered Arab countries, but they are basically Islamic countries. That means when Islam was founded in 620 AD or ACE, Islam took over the area, and they took over Persia at that time, and most Persians or Iranians over the next few decades and hundreds, few centuries became Muslims, but Arabs and Muslims were the same for a few hundred years. Arabs ruled for between 200 to 400 years in today's Iran, most of Iran or Persia. Then the nationalists rose up and kicked them out. And in Turkey, the Turks rose up. Ottoman Empire or Turkish Empire was first founded in 1299 AD. So they became an inheritors. They took the mantle of Islam from the Arabs, and they started the Ottoman Empire to spread their ideology, their culture, whatever, not only around them in West Asia, but they went all the way to Europe. As you know, the story of Ottoman Empire. They even took over Hungary. They went to the doorsteps of Vienna for hundreds of years. I'm very familiar, or somewhat familiar, with what Mamoun was saying, because I personally spent about 15, 20 years ago, I spent several years on behalf of Amnesty International to free a political prisoner under Assad. His name is Mamoun al-Hamsi. Mamoun al-Hamsi was a learned member of parliament who basically opposed a few pieces of legislation. He didn't even do anything against Assad. He was just very politely, in a democratic way, critical of some of the policies. So he was arrested, tortured, he was in jail, and Amnesty International rallied a large letter-writing movement. We contacted members of US Congress, etc. After a few years, he was freed. And I just heard from Mazen that he's still alive, and he went back to Syria after the fall of Assad. So that makes me feel good. One person out of hundreds of thousands survived. And the question is, before I get into Iran, why do we have all these problems in the Middle East or West Asia? I would like to recommend a documentary I found about a year ago. Most documentaries online, if you go on Google and YouTube, most documentaries are biased. They are made by pro-this organization, by AIPAC, by an Islamic group, by a nationalist group, by a military group, by US Defense Department. I found one that's relatively impartial, and it's called Why Middle East Borders Guarantee Continuous Warfare. Put it on. Why Middle East Borders Guarantee Continuous Warfare. There is a narrator in English that goes through history, really good audiovisual maps and charts explaining what happened when the British took over the Ottoman Empire, how they divided, and that became the root of the problems we've had for 120, 130 years. With Iran, the Ottoman Empire never conquered Iran or Persia. They had a number of wars. The borders changed, came into Turkey this way, went into Iran that way. They took over part of Iran's Azerbaijan, then Iran took it back. From what I gather, going back 2,500 years ago, Iran has had 7 major empires, 7 major dynasties expanded the Persian Empire, and then they went down by some invasion or internal dispute. So the fight between the Turks and the Persians prevented the Ottoman Empire to take over Iran. And, but they took over Egypt. And if you look at the definition of the Middle East, it's kind of vague. It used to be called Near East by the British, as compared to Far East, which meant China and eastern part of Asia. But if you look at it today, most scholars are including Iran, non-Arab, Turkey, non-Arab, Cyprus, the island of Cyprus on the eastern part of the Mediterranean as part of the Middle East. They're also including Egypt and Libya, which are in Africa. They are not in Asia. So if you go by that definition, most of these countries were under Ottoman rule, then they went to the British rule, and the British divided in a way. Basically, I agree that they somehow ensured continuous disputes and warfare. Look at the Kurdish people. The Kurdish people are divided into 4 different countries. The British promised them, and the Americans have promised them several times, will help you create your own country. Even in the last 13 years, during the Syrian civil war, Americans have become allies with the Kurds, and somehow leading them on that we are going to help you create your own country. But it never comes. So the Kurds are divided between Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And therefore, what that has caused, some younger zealots, they become so passionate, they go to radical measures to create their own country. And that is what has been happening in the Middle East since that division by the British. They divided Palestine into 2 spheres. In 1917, the Balfour Revolution, Foreign Minister of Britain said, okay, let's have half of it or part of it be Jewish, part of it be non-Jewish. Because at that time, Palestinians were about 20% Christian. So then the British and the French and the Americans helped the Jewish state be created, but they neglected the Palestinian or Arab state. And that's why we have all these problems. If another state for Palestinians had been created then, or under Jimmy Carter, or under Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright, or under Obama, we wouldn't have had all this killing and waste of resources, or we would have a lot less. Now, Iran is a different story because Iran goes back to 3,200 years of history according to Google, when Susa was the capital of the Iranians or the Persians. First of all, Persia was a province northwest of Persian Gulf, as you know, where the Iranians referred to it as Pars, the area of Pars. And when Arabs took over Persia in 630, 640 AD, they didn't have fe in their language, so they called it pe. I'm sorry, they didn't have pe, they called it fe. So Pars became Fars. That's hence the term they say, well, how do you speak?
Farsi.
What language do you speak? Farsi. It's actually Parsi. But the term Iran is more accurate according to luminaries like, our great own anthropologist, Dr. William Beeman, who was the head of University of Minnesota Anthropology, who is now an emeritus professor, but he's a visiting professor, or he works with Stanford. He does lectures there. He said, well, Iran is more correct because Iran refers to the greater Iran, which was the home of Indo-Europeans. Therefore, Iranians are not Semitic like most Arabs are. And to begin with, if you look at it, Syrians were not Arabs either. Lebanese were basically Phoenicians, if I may say so. So Arabs conquered and ruled and brought their religion and culture, and Iran, the alphabet was changed. Some Iranian historians say the religion of Islam was forced on the Persians with the power of the sword. Some of that is true from what I gather, but if you look at non-Iranian historians, especially Westerns, they say a lot of it happened by proselytizing and by convincing, and it happened over the years and centuries. So it wasn't really a religion that was forced on them. It's very hard to find the truth. I mean, you have to read and read. And nowadays, it's harder to find the truth because on the internet, you get mostly junk. Everybody spins the truth about it. And now I'm so sad to see that Mr. Zuckerberg says he's going to stop fact check in America. That's going to even make it worse. I can go put in there anything I want and influence people. So Iran has a long history, and they moved from different dynasties, basically dictatorships, kings, and finally they got to 1905 constitutional revolution in Iran, which I would call the pro-democracy revolution of Iran. This 1905 through 1912, 1905 was even before Turkey had its constitutional revolution to bring constitutional monarchy, which means creating a parliament and political parties and free newspapers. Iran was the first one. Who suppressed it? The Tsarist Russians. The Tsar sent troops. The king of Iran, Mozaffareddin, signed the constitutional declaration of constitutional monarchy, then died 3 days later. Then his son, who took over, started massacring the young people who were promoting democracy. And the Tsar of Russia sent troops to help him. They even went and shelled the newly formed Iranian parliament in Tehran and killed the parliamentarians in it. Who encouraged that? The British. Even though the British, they had found oil, and for 300 years they played the great game against the Russians to prevent Tsarist Russia to take over Iran and Afghanistan and Persian Gulf. The great game was because the British controlled India, which at that time controlled Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. It was just Persia and India for centuries. So the British said, oh, we found oil in 1908 in southwest Iran before anywhere else in the Middle East. And now this country is important. So they helped because they wanted security there, and they wanted to make sure that the Tsarist Russians weren't going to come and take over, especially after the Bolsheviks took over in 1917. The British helped a military man by the name of Reza Khan to overthrow the dynasty of the Qajar dynasty after some 120 years. And he took over in 1920, became a strong man. 1925, he declared himself the king of Persia. The British helped him, gave him weapons and money, and helped him to come to power. What did he do? He became quite a nationalist. And he started developing, opening up the doors. His best friend was Mustafa Kemal in Turkey, Ataturk, who was modernizing Turkey after the British had been defeated in the Battle of Gallipoli at the end of World War I. The British wanted to destroy the Ottoman Empire, but they also wanted to keep controlling the area. And the Turks rebelled, and Ataturk became a hero of the Turks, and they got their own modern Turkey created. And Reza in Iran wanted to copy him. Actually, there was one country Reza Shah visited in the 20 years he was in power, 15 years of which he was a king, he went to Turkey to visit their developments. But the British got angry. You know what he did? He made French language the second language of Iran. He brought the Belgians and the Swiss to develop the education system, the customs, the governmental ministries. The British said, oh, he put you in power to be our guy. And now you're doing your own thing. So they were looking for an excuse to get rid of him. World War II came. Reza Shah had 2,000 German engineers working there, professors. My own father became a chemical engineer in 1930s. Most of his professors were German, French, Swiss, Belgians. Few Americans, not at that time, because there were not enough Iranian professors. So the British didn't like that, especially when they got into dispute with the Nazis. They didn't like Iran to be independent. They invaded it. They arrested Reza Shah in 1941, sent him into exile in South Africa. They put his 21-year-old son, who'd grown up in Switzerland, as the king of Iran. Now, Iranians got very angry. But when they realized what a terrible guy Hitler had been, what a terrible regime the Nazis had been, so they forgave that. And from 1941 to 1951, Iran moved fast toward the democratic system, copying the British parliamentary system. And Americans were very preeminent there because Reza Shah wanted to have better relations with Americans, even before the previous dynasty. I went to a high school set up by a Presbyterian missionary by the name of James Bassett, which was organized in 1870s, Al Gore's boys' school. It started as an elementary school, then it became a boys' prep school. Now, later in 1905, when the revolution started for democracy, an American missionary by the name of Howard Baskerville from Nebraska went to Iran to teach. And he joined the revolution and picked up a gun and fought against the government of Iran and the troops of Turkey on behalf of Iranians. So Iranians always looked at Americans as our friends. And from between 1941 and 1951, there was relative democracy. That's when I remember as a child. And Iran moved toward democracy. Why do Europeans have it? Why do Americans have it? Why can't we have it? So they moved toward the democracy, and they wanted that. And then the British, they said the oil in Iran, which belongs to the British Petroleum, should belong to Iranians. The British got angry. They wanted to overthrow the duly elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mossadegh. They didn't have money and forces to do it after World War I. They came to Americans. America went and overthrew their government. That's where animosity started. That's why we got Ayatollah Khomeini. That's why we've got problems of today. When are we going to treat Iranians as equals? As humans? When are we going to treat the Arabs and the Muslims as humans? Thank you.
You know I have the hardest job in the world. I hate to cut anybody off, but we're right on task and on schedule. From Mahmoud from Lebanon. You did not grow up in Lebanon, or did you?
No, I did.
Okay, but
I did.
thank you, Mahmoud. And thank you, Jay.
Hi, everyone. So bear with me. I like to go off paper because I tend to kind of go off topic sometimes because everything leads to everything else. So if I'm looking down, I'm just trying to make sure that I stick to the time. And if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them afterwards. The first thing I wanted to, before I introduce myself, is I wanted to everyone here to understand and see what was happening as we come down the line here, is that you're seeing this coalition that is happening, correlation that is happening of who is responsible behind everything that's happening in the Middle East. Right? Colonization never led, as we can see in history right now, it never led to anything other than a disastrous thing that is happening in the future. And we are still going to see more happen in our future. And, I hope that we can proceed more carefully as the time goes by. So first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Mamoun Slahi. I am Lebanese. I'm deeply honored to joining you today. Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate you for the invite. It was a pure chance of luck that I ended up here, to be honest. But I appreciate it. And Lebanon is not just my homeland. It is a symbol of resilience for me, culture and complexity that represents the Middle East. I was born and raised in Lebanon, Beirut, and I was there until I was 17 years old. My mom's family is the Tanir family, which is a very well-known Lebanese, long-established family in Lebanon, especially in Beirut. And my father is also Lebanese, but his roots actually come from what is now known as Syria. So from my dad's side, you can say I'm also Lebanese Syrian. Before the French mandate divided us into separate nations, Lebanon and Syria were part of a larger, more interconnected region, as he mentioned, of the Ottoman Empire. My family's story reflects the complex history of Lebanon and its shared identity that was disrupted by colonial boundaries and that had left its mark to this day. Growing up in Beirut, I attended a Maronite Christian school. And in case you don't know, I am Muslim. So just so I attended a Maronite Christian school where I actually forged friendships with different people from different sects. And that was the vision of Lebanon. To us, there was no division. We were simply all Lebanese. We were the new generation. We were the hope that was going to heal the past wounds and build a unified, more harmonious Lebanon. Despite our hopes, the task was proven to be challenging. And with that, because of external influences and political agendas, it has often worked against the harmony that we have envisioned. But the spirit of unity still burns brightly within many of us. And you can see that reflected in many of the social media posts that you will see that are coming out from Lebanon. There is some animosity that came towards the Syrians, and then some Syrian animosity towards Lebanese, and then there's some towards the Palestinians, and vice versa, and that was all to simply distract. And then it came out in force from everybody from every sect that said, no, our homes are open, no matter what. Lebanon's history is important to understand. I don't believe that you can just look at things from this point on. It's important to look at things, how did we get here? So the history is important. So I would like to give you a small history, and I hope I don't go over time here. Lebanon's history is rich it's a rich tapestry of woven and influence that was given by countless civilizations. As the land of the ancient Phoenicians, again, as he mentioned, it was a hub of maritime trade and cultural exchange. It shaped up as much of the Mediterranean's early history. The famous cedars of Lebanon, they were revered since biblical times. Even Jesus said, like the cedars of Lebanon, which symbolized the strength and resilience, the quality deeply ingrained into all of our people. During the time of the Phoenicians, Lebanon was the heart of the maritime trading empire. From there, the cities that are to this day still exist, such as Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon, which is Sidon in English. The Phoenicians introduced the first alphabet. They established extensive trade networks across the Mediterranean, and Byblos, which is known in Arabic as Jbel, became one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities, playing a crucial role during the trade times. And that will come later on during the Roman era. Lebanon was incorporated into the Roman Empire, which it had a lasting architectural legacy, including the Grand Temple in Baalbek. Baalbek is also known as Heliopolis during that time. It emerged as a major religious center for the Romans. When the Romans left, they left, and then that was during the Islamic Golden Era, if you want to say. And Lebanon became part of the multiple Muslim caliphates up until the Ottoman era. Lebanon was part of the province which is known as Sham. You'll hear people say Bilad Sham, the countries of Sham. These are the areas that encompass Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and those were the main countries that were of that time. This period fostered a blend of culture, a fluid of identities across the region. However, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during World War I brought significant changes. The French and the British, they divided the Middle East under the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, placing Lebanon and Syria under French control, while Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, and we will say also Egypt at that time as well, they were placed under the British controls. On September 1st, 1920, France decided, you know what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take all the Christians, put them on one side, and take all the Muslims, put them on another side, like the British did in Pakistan and India. And they thought they wanted to do that. So in 1920, France declared the establishment of Greater Lebanon, which was Syria and most parts of Lebanon, and they wanted to give that to the Muslims, and then the other part, which became Lebanon, wanted to give to the Christians. Lebanon gained independence. During that time, they did not fly for a lot of us, right? I come from, my grandmother is actually Christian. She became Muslim when she married to my grandfather, but so a lot of families are like mine, which is you have family that is a Christian family and you have family that is Muslim family. And that does not work when you want a unified country. So Lebanon gained its independence from France in 1943 and adopted a power-sharing system aimed to ensure coexistence among the religious communities, but it also institutionalized a lot of sectarianism, which meant there's going to be a rise of some sort of a sect that wants to have something for themselves, and that's a problem. The country faced post-independence challenges, and those challenges did not really present themselves right away. Lebanon was the hub. Lebanon was the jewel of the Middle East at that time, up until 1975. Lebanon got involved in civil war, and it was fueled by internal sectarian tensions and regional conflicts. The war was extended and further complicated by interventions of foreign powers like Israel, the Assad regime from Syria, and Iran. It ended up with the Ta'if Agreement in 1989, and things did not really take effect until about 1990, 1991. I was alive during those times. I got to see the Civil War as well, and the unfortunate part is it seems that every generation in Lebanon has to see some sort of a war. So, which restructured the Lebanese political system without fully resolving the sectarian issue. And that's what we are dealing with in this day and age right now, is the Ta'if Agreement that was created was never revisited to reshape the political system that we are in right now. Lebanon's historical and geopolitical context continues to shape its role as a bridge between the East and the West. It is underpinned by a rich tapestry of cultural influence. It is important to note that many evidence of the civil war can be pinpointed back to Israel. As much of it in history can be shown as it was this militant group and that militant group. Every militant group essentially said, we don't know who this person was, or this person just simply dropped off the face of the earth and we don't know where they are. And that should kind of give you kind of it should resonate quite well, because you'll hear that over and over in different countries in the Middle East. That would be happening. Lebanon's position as the bridge between East and West is not just geographical, but it is also cultural. It's a diverse population, a mosaic of Christians, Muslims, Druze, have fostered a unique blend of tradition, language, and perspective. This diversity has made Lebanon a beacon of coexistence, though it has also presented challenges in maintaining the political stability. It is important to let people know. A lot of people don't, there's this myth that is presented in the US by the US politicians. Israel is the only democracy. It is not. I'm sorry to tell you, but we are to the north, and we are a republic, which is a form of democracy. So, with that being said, in the Middle East, Lebanon occupies a delicate position. Regionally, it is deeply affected by the influence of larger powers, such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and each was vying for the influence within its borders. Globally, Lebanon's strategic location made it a focal point. That's why it became kind of the jewel, because there was a lot of interest from commerce and for diplomacy for conflict resolution. Many Lebanese that you will meet, including myself, will speak at minimum of 3 languages, from English to Arabic to French. Some of us speak Spanish. Some of us also speak, nowadays we also speak Mandarin. So that is always have been and will always will be part of our identity. We want to be the conflict resolution. While maintaining the friendly relationship with many of our nations, the nations are around us, one consistent adversary has always been and always will be, if it continues on this route, is Israel, whose repeated aggression against Lebanon has left deep scars that are not mere clashes. They're not wars, they're not clashes, but they are straight violations of our sovereignty, security, and dignity. Anywhere from, if you look back to 1982, when they tried to take over Beirut, but they were defeated. Then they took over the south of Lebanon, and then we finally were able to get rid of them and remove them from occupying the south of Lebanon in 2000. We were fighting them from 2000 until 2005. So I was very sad when that. I was happy, but sad at the same time, because I was not there to celebrate. Because I've seen it occupied, but I didn't see it free until I went and visited about 8 years later. The biggest thing to understand is why do these countries, especially a country like Lebanon, why can it not defend itself? Or why is it so complicated? I'm going to hit on 2 points. The Lebanese army and the militants that are within, the militias that are within Lebanon. The Lebanese army symbolizes a national pride and unity because it draws personnel from all religions and all regional backgrounds. However, the Lebanese army forces are faced with a lot of limitations because of external factors, such as sanctions that were imposed on them from European countries and the US that restricts them from acquiring advanced weaponry, particularly from Western allies. So this imbalance of forces in Lebanon, it forces Lebanon to rely on foreign assistance while at the same time contending with internal and external threats. That's what caused the rise of something such as Hezbollah, right? Hezbollah did not just come out of nowhere. It came from in 1979 to 1982, there was incursion from Israel in. And that actually caused the rise of what we call Muqawama, right? The resistance. Then Hezbollah gained its popularity because it was strictly the resistance. It wasn't the Shia, it wasn't they were Shia or Sunni, it wasn't that it was strictly just resistance, and that's what it was at that time. As time went by, and as they actually were able to, the Lebanese army was not able to have this victory to themselves, because the Hezbollah was actually the one that helped out and actually kicked out the Israeli occupation from the south of Lebanon. But that also kind of gave Hezbollah more of a popularity. And people were all behind them and said, okay, we are fine with you being part of the government, but you can't be taken over. And all of a sudden, Hezbollah turned to become what it is today, which is mainly a Shia militia, and it wasn't really just, it's hard to say, because Hezbollah is this, it used to be the resistance, and now it is the resistance, but it is also a problem in Lebanon. So it's this gray line that is being worked on, and it is hard to see and say we stand with them when they went ahead and killed our families in Syria, right? Their hands are not clean. So it's a hard thing to look at, and it's a reality that the Lebanese people have to actually work on. And with the new elected president, finally, we have a president, and the new elected parliamentary president, we are hoping for a newer and fresh Lebanon all over again that will coincide with the new government of Syria as well. So before I conclude, let us talk about something that every Lebanese person is proud about, our cuisine. We love food. So from tabbouleh to hummus to baba ghanoush to fattoush, food is celebrated worldwide. Now, as you've noticed, some of our neighbors, we're not going to name names, they want to claim this thing is theirs. Let's set the record straight. Hummus did not just wander off, and baba ghanoush did not just sprout out of nowhere. These dishes are as Lebanese as the cedars are. But in Lebanese fashion, we're more than happy to share. Just don't claim they are yours. Lebanon's story is a story of resilience and complexity and hope. Despite the challenges we face, our history and identity reminds us of our strength and potential. What I want to say is I want to say thank you for this opportunity for me to share this information with you today. Thank you.
If I may add a footnote, I'd like to ask Dr. Nasreen Jewel, the economist, professor, and Iran expert, how many wars have there been between the Persians and the Arabs because one side or the other claims kebab is either Iranian or Arab?
Yeah.
We could bob around on that topic a long time. That applause was not just for you, Mahmoud, it was for all three of you, and let's thank them again. I think we can all agree that this afternoon has been one of education, of compassion, and solidarity. So we thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. It's a passionate issue. I'm sure for you it's good to know there are a few Americans that get this. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and I have a feeling that a couple of my questions you already have. So we'll start maybe with a couple of the obvious ones. And this first question is for all of you, and I don't know which one wants to take on a microphone first, so we can fight over that. What is your country's position in the Middle East? Who are your friends, foes, and what is your military strength? Who wants to go first?
What was the first part of the question?
What is your position in the Middle East?
Yes.
Who are your friends, your foes, and what is your military strength? And that's an interesting one for Syria because your military strength was Assad. So what's going on with the military?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? With, sorry about that. Is that better? Yeah. Syria is, I mean, historically was a Soviet ally to some extent, but I think most of the Middle East fell between those two camps for a long time. You're either part of the Soviet camp or part of the Western camp. And Syria and Cuba and Venezuela and Eastern Europe were close allies for a long time. That obviously changed in the last 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. In politics, you really don't have friends. Right? I mean, that's a common premise is you have interest, and if they align, great. If they don't, you move on. And I think Syria is no different from that perspective. And I think the same for the rest of the Arctic, whether it's Egypt or Syria or any other ones. The U.S. doesn't have friends either. And I hate to say it, but the U.S. is the empire of our time. This is Rome, right? And Rome did not send its ship to the Syrian and Lebanese and Palestinian shore for altruistic reason. It wanted to expand that empire and every empire after it. And the U.S. doesn't put military bases in the world to feed the hungry and treat the sick. It's just expanded that empire. Now, the sad thing about that is there's goodness in America that the world doesn't see. I mean, look here. You guys have spent the afternoon worrying about countries thousands of miles away. Nobody would know that. And that's the goodness that the world doesn't see. And it doesn't see of any empire, for that matter. So, I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry about that.
No need to apologize.
But I'll pass it on.
Jay, do you want to add to that?
Well, it depends when you're talking about. Today, Iran has a relatively strong army, or I should say has relatively strong armed forces. Yesterday, 3 days before the inauguration of President Trump, President of Iran went to Moscow and signed an agreement with President of Russia on a 20-year defense and economic agreement. It's a very all-encompassing. So for sure, Russia is a close friend of Iran now. And let's look at what happened. The Iranian revolution came in 1979 when the Islamists under Ayatollah Khomeini took over, turned Iran into a theocracy. They abolished 2,500 and some years of monarchy. That was quite a historic change. So soon after, and there's plenty of evidence now that Americans indirectly helped the Ayatollah to come to power. Read the book, The Fall of Heaven, by Professor Andrew Cooper at Princeton. Read the books by Stephen Kinzer, the professor at Brown University and former reporter for New York Times and others. The revolution in Iran started like in 74, 75, but it really got going in 78 for many reasons. We don't have time to get into that. But when the revolution came, the Americans were worried about the Soviet communism coming and taking over Iran. So they helped the religious faction, Ayatollah Khomeini, to come to power. Soon after that, within 9 months, they got into a dispute because America wanted to control the Ayatollah, and the Ayatollah was not going to have anybody telling him what to do. So they got into a dispute. So the Ayatollah supported the taking over of the American embassy, as you know, and the dispute started. But there's plenty of evidence that going back to 1974, President Nixon made a statement at the White House to Henry Kissinger when the oil prices were increased by Arabs and OPEC in 1974. Oil prices were quadrupled, and the United States faced energy crisis, and President Nixon was having problems because of the Watergate. He told Kissinger, I want that SOB, meaning the king of Iran, the Shah of Iran, gone. And Kissinger turns and says, well, who are we going to replace him with? He's the only strong man, friend of America we've had for some 30 years. Who's going to protect the Persian Gulf? We've given him all the weapons, all the advisors, we deal with him, he buys our weapons, we've made him into policeman of the Persian Gulf. So the question is, Americans did not want the Soviets to take over, and when President Carter was president in 1978-79, that was the big fear of Americans. I'm not saying it was bad or good. They didn't want the Soviets to come. And Soviet Union had tried once, right after World War II, to take over northern Iran and to turn it into a Soviet Socialist Republic. And under Tsarist Russia, the Russians had tried to take over Iran. There were two major wars between the Tsarist Russians and the Persians. And Iran lost several of its provinces, including Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, part of Turkmenistan, part of Afghanistan. So there was this fear of communism, and therefore they figured, well, we have to help a religious leader to come to power because he is going to be anti-communist. He is going to destroy the Communist Party of Iran. So that happened, and now since then, since animosity started, then the Iran-Iraq War was instigated, 1980 to 88. Nobody helped Iran because Iran's armed forces were basically American supplied under the Shah. And Iraq's forces under Saddam Hussein were Soviet supplied. So the two were fighting each other without spare parts, without bullets. So they eventually changed, but Iran learned the lesson, said nobody's helping us, nobody wants to help us, therefore we are going to produce our own weapons. And today Iran is producing missiles, hypersonic missiles. They're selling drones to Russia. I could not believe that I'm sitting here. Iran is selling weapons to Russia, to mighty Soviet, leftover of mighty Soviet Union. That means Iran has developed a strong military. That's one reason the Israelis or the Americans or a coalition of European, American, Israelis have not really attacked Iran or bombed Iran. One main reason is because Iran has a strong military and they can fight for years, and that would be very costly and expose the whole area to a lot of danger. That's one deterrent. Another one is that I think Iran may have the atomic bomb, or for sure, according to experts, they have all the components ready. I've read some non-American news reports that Iran could assemble a nuclear weapon within 24 hours. They've got the components ready. If attacked, and if it's existential, they will use it. You have to understand their mentality. So that's the second deterrent. And the third deterrent is that Iran has had these proxies that they developed, including the Hezbollah. In 1982, after Israel, under Menachem Begin, invaded Lebanon, Ayatollah Khomeini said, hey, it's a great chance. Let's go help the Hezbollah. Hezbollah were the Lebanese people who started a resistance movement against Israel, and Iran came to their help with weapons and money. And that became a sort of a life insurance for Ayatollah Khomeini's regime. Then after that, they created other proxies. So today, messing with Iran is very dangerous. That's why it hasn't happened.
Next.
All right. One thing I want to say before I proceed is, from my side, right, whenever I say, you know, the foe is this or that, or the friend is this or that, a lot of times we're speaking about governments, right? We're not speaking about the people, because there are exceptions, of course, but we are speaking about, because there are people who do not stand for what the government stands for, right?
There are many right here.
There are many that are right here, exactly. So it's important to make that distinction. So I want people to not take what we say or what I say out of context, of understanding that when I'm speaking about this, I'm talking about the governments. I'm talking about the influence that some of these governments may have. With that being said, Lebanon, we like to have more friends than have enemies, to be honest. And out of, like, again, the very well known, right, our biggest foe is Israel, that has been putting, Mossad agents and militants in Lebanon, trying to break down the democracy or the republic of Lebanon, and trying to create more sectarianism within Lebanon. It's important to understand that that is our biggest foe, and that is our biggest issue, and they are the hinderers of peace in the Middle East, to be honest. And with that being said, we don't really have many foes. At this time, as he mentioned, right, your friends and foes kind of like, it fluctuates depending on what the government is. So, up until 2000, 2004, right? Saudi Arabia was a great ally of ours. And then after that, now there's a strenuous relationship between Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, they don't like Hezbollah, and they don't like that there is some control in there, and they don't like the prime minister that we put in, and they don't like the president that we put in. It's like, it's none of your business, right? So I have the biggest opinion of, we can deal with things internally. We should deal with things internally. Nobody from outside should be coming in and telling people what to do. That's the biggest important part. The example here also is Syria. We don't have any problem with Syria, right? The Syrian people, right? I have family, extended family that is from Syria, that is in Syria living today. But we had a problem with the Assad regime. The Assad regime actually perpetuated massacres, as he mentioned, in Lebanon. And they actually would put in checkpoints in Lebanon, and people would disappear from those checkpoints. So, we have cousins that just simply disappeared, and we don't know what happened to them. To this day, it's an unknown thing. So, who would be, our foe was the Assad regime. It wasn't the Syrian people, but it was the Assad regime which controlled Syria. But now they're gone, and we hope for better relationships. Because Lebanon and Syria has always been, essentially brothers, right? They are brothers, and there's no denying that. We're cut from the same cloth. And same thing in Syria, in Palestine. Again, we're cut from the same cloth. So for me, I would say the biggest foe is Israel. The U.S. is not even a foe of ours. We understand there is a lot of complexity to what the U.S. is dealing with. And as for the military, it's we're okay. We're okay. There is no military power in Lebanon. I would say this: the Lebanese army is missing its equipment. That's what is happening, right? When you put sanctions on it and say to it, you can't have an air force that's strong because, well, we need Israel to be the strong hand over here. You can't have, weaponry that is strong because of this. And because we want to play nice, and we don't want to be on, we're a small country, right? We don't have the resources to just go against everybody in the world, right? So you have to play nice, and you have to play politics. And that's what hinders the Lebanese army at this time.
Thank you. Imagine if there were no military anywhere in the entire world. Quote John Owen. Let's see. Are you ready for questions? Okay, I'm going to do my best to point, and Debbie's going to come with the microphone, and the gentleman with the glasses and his sweater.
Yep.
Sure.
Hi, this is for Razine. I'm wondering, you've mentioned martial law in Syria and the fact that the U.S. is essentially an empire or currently an empire. Is there any analogy between martial law, as you see it, and the fact that the U.S. using its military budget to extremes, huge military budget, that it, in a sense, serves as a martial law over the countries of this earth, this planet. In other words, as Mahmoud said, you can't do this and you can't do that because it doesn't fit our interests. Is that a form of martial law on our part?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. obviously, the U.S. doesn't build bases around the world. It's just for vacation, right? To send the soldiers out there. When the U.S. wanted to put sanctions on Iran, and some of the money was going through Switzerland, and they asked the Swiss for the records of some of the deposits that Iran had. Switzerland stood behind the banking secrecy. And the US said, if you don't give it to us, we'll get you out of the banking system. And so Switzerland, to some extent, abandoned its banking secrecy at the request of the US. So does the US have, with the military power that it has out there, basically a say in what happens in some of the country? No doubt. Yeah, that's a given. And it's not, as Obama said, it's not our military, but it's our values that we lead the world with. That's not true. And with all respect to Obama, I like the guy. So, yeah, no doubt. I mean, being the largest economic power in the world since the Civil War, by the way. The U.S. became the largest, and Professor Nasreen may have a different opinion on this, but the U.S. became the largest economic power in the world in the early 1860s or so. And so, since that point, had an influence on the world, everywhere.
Next question? Sir, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sylvia. You touched on this a little bit already, but Lebanon has a new prime minister that was found acceptable by the U.S. I find that unacceptable. And he chose as president a man who was the chief or presiding judge of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which sounds good for Lebanon. And what happened then was the new presiding judge of the ICJ became the judge from Uganda. Uganda was the only country that ruled against or ruled in favor of Israel at the ICJ hearings, both in January and when was it, July, something like that. So I'd like you to comment on whether there's what that means for the ICJ and what that means for Israel and Palestine.
I'm assuming that's for me. That's a very good question, and it's very well put. So thank you for that. You don't need to repeat, right?
No.
We're good. We're good. Okay. First thing is first. What does that mean for the ICJ? Unfortunately, we won't know, right? I can speculate, right? And I would hope that the judge does not really represent the Ugandan standpoint, right? I would hope he is an actual judge that would see the truth and judge upon that. But the reality of it is, that may not be the case. And maybe yes, maybe no. I can't really give you an answer on that. It's pure speculation. But my belief would be that there is a mounting evidence that I believe cannot be put to the side and for them to say, oh no, they did not do it. I think we are on our way to say that Benjamin Netanyahu and his government actually did commit genocide. And what was the second part of that question?
How is he for your country, Lebanon?
Yes. As for Lebanon, to be honest, I'm really excited when they've announced him. What we've been waiting since Hariri. Hariri was so the president has to be a Maronite Christian. And then the prime minister, or what would, kind of you would call him a prime minister, is more like the president of the parliament, the president of the parliament is going to be a Shia, and then the prime minister is going to be Sunni Muslim, right? That's kind of how they separated it, in case you did not know that. So for us seeing that, Joseph Aoun is actually a guy that has been very outspoken on the detriments of what is happening in Lebanon. And then he's always been kind of outspoken against, oppressing people's opinions. And like when the revolution in Lebanon was taken part, he was actually saying to the military, because he's responsible for the military at that time, that you need to just stand their guard, do not oppose them, right? So for me seeing that happen and then him picking out a just judge is exciting, because I think this is a new era for Lebanon to kind of go back on top, similar to what during the Hariri time. The Hariri time was like from 91 until 2000. That's kind of like the boom of Lebanon. And I think I'm hoping that's what would happen. And if all indications are correct, that's what we're looking at.
Next.
Oh, sorry. I'll come back here. You? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'd like to know more. Oh, this is April Knudsen with Minnesota Peace Project. I'd like to know more about the Kurdish people. As I understand it, both in northern Syria and southern Lebanon, and how this is a battle not just for control of the borders of Lebanon and Syria, but a battle against the Kurdish people, with Turkey, of course, playing a major role in that, because they accuse the Kurds of trying to take over Turkey. And then the one place where U.S. has boots on the ground is right there too, in northern Syria, protecting the Kurds. Am I right? It seems like a really complex situation.
April, the U.S. forces are protecting the Kurds as well as the oil wells.
It's true. It is true. You feel bad for the Kurds. They just can't win. Everybody's using them. Everybody is fighting them. And it's a sad situation because they're split, as Jay mentioned, across the 5 countries: Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, 4 countries. And they're the largest ethnic group without a country in the world. I think they're 20 million or so.
41 million.
41 million. So, and they've been used through the recent history for other countries' interests. Just like Jay said, the U.S. saying we want to protect the Kurds. In reality, they're not protecting the Kurds. They're just using them to have a position to control the Iraqis and the Turks. And so I don't think it'll be difficult for them to create their own country. And within Syria, the new government said, we want to allow a division of the country. Because Lebanon was an experience in terms of splitting part of the country from Syria. The French wanted to divide Syria into 5 different countries, and having a Kurdish country was one of them. Sunni in the middle, Druze in the south, Alawite in the shore, and Christian for Lebanon. The only one that succeeded was Lebanon in splitting from Syria. But so to that point, the new government said that will not get repeated. We're not going to split the country, which means that the Kurds will not have their own country in Syria. But what they did say is that we will have a decentralized government, meaning they can run their own affairs. They can have their own educational system, they can select their mayors and so on and so forth, which really in a lot of ways no different than the decentralized system in the US. Towns select their mayors, they have their curriculum as far as they fit into certain educational standards within the states. So it's pretty much the same concept. But I feel bad for the Kurds.
Do you mind if I answer?
Yeah, please.
I'm here, Debbie. Oh, I'm sorry. No, no.
Sorry, I just wanted to add a few points, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to add a few points. The first one is I served in the US military, right, in hopes that I could make a difference of some sort because of the injustice that I was seeing that was happening to the Iraqi people during that time. I was young, and I believe I was dumb. You know, and when I came out of that, I came out very pessimistic. I came out extremely disheartened with what I saw. And to your point is that and both of your points, the US doesn't exist anywhere for the sake of, oh, we're there to sing kumbaya with people and bring democracy. Their thought of democracy is, we're going to take your resources and we're going to give you some kind of a democracy that will falter and fail within the next few years, and then we'll come back again as saviors and take more of your resources. That's one thing that I want to bring up. As for the Kurds, I feel bad for them as well. But there's something that's extremely important, and I'm very vocal about is there's no creation of an ethno-state is never a good idea. Creation of an ethno-state is never a good idea. Just because we are these kind of people, we need our own state. That's not how it works. You exist and coexist with other people within that area. So it is in the best interest of the Kurds to actually say, listen, we understand that we may not get our country, but we want some kind of anonymity. Just like we have right now, as Mazen mentioned, right? He said, it's kind of like having a state. That is a agreeable thing. But to say I want to have my own country, I believe it is a recipe for disaster, because we've seen that happen over and over again. So the Kurds right now are in a dangerous time, and they need to understand who their true allies are and who is just simply using them.
Right.
May I add something to that?
Absolutely.
First of all, what Mahmoud said, you know, after World War I, what did the victors of that war do? Create the League of Nations. What was the purpose of League of Nations? To bring people together, to create more democratic, open societies which are not based on ethnicity or religion. Then it failed. Its main purpose was to prevent war and bring wars to an end, but it failed to prevent World War II, which most historians now consider became an extension of World War I, because the way the Allies humiliated the Germans and forced them to pay reparations for World War I, that created animosity in Germany, and a demagogue, radical, like Hitler took over. And then we created the UN after World War II for the same purpose of bringing the world together. And now, I'm sorry to say, after the Ukraine war and Gaza war, I'm losing all hopes in this effort. We also had Eleanor Roosevelt and others declare human rights declaration 80, 90 years ago. But we're getting away toward more dictatorships and authoritarianism all over the world, even in India, the largest democracy. So I visited Beirut as a young college student. It used to be called the Paris of the Middle East. It was an amazing amalgam of religions, cultures. You could wear a scarf, you could not wear a scarf. You had restaurants, you had bars. People were getting along. Why was it destroyed? Especially by those who instigated the civil war in 1975, and then the invasion by the Israeli armed forces in 1982. By the way, if you remember, in 1982, I happened to be watching Walter Cronkite television news at 5:30, and I saw that President of the United States, named Ronald Reagan, was surprised about Israel's attack on Lebanon. So later I read that he is become the only president of the United States who ever yelled at an Israeli prime minister, because he picked up the phone right there and told Menachem Begin, "What the hell are you doing, killing innocent people?" So the point is that if we move toward acceptance and equality, if we still today move toward letting Palestinians create a home, because I don't see how we can have one state there. People who are realists like John Mearsheimer or Noam Chomsky have said that for decades, it's not possible. But it is possible to create a Palestinian state. However, there are people in Israel, there are people in the United States, the two superpowers of the world, who are mother and child or father and child, don't want that to happen. Maybe most of you do, but the people who control the foreign policy of the United States don't. And I may add a personal note here. I'm neither anti-Israel, nor anti-Semite, nor anti-Muslim, nor anti-Iranian. Just the last speech I gave about a week ago, I got accused of being a stooge of the Islamic Republic because I said a war with Iran is a mistake. And I just remembered Dr. Jewell and I, and also Professor William Beeman, we were all accused of being lobbyists for the government of Iran some 15 years ago because we were speaking against the war with Iran. An Iranian newspaper, English language newspaper here in Minnesota, accused us three of being stooges of the Islamic Republic because we were against war. So, anything you do, you can get accused of what. But right now, unless the United States moves to stop this massacre or genocide or whatever, it's just killing innocent people. It's gone overboard in Gaza. And also Ukraine. And I hear that even in Sudan right now, there are outside forces behind the two groups who are massacring people.
Debbie, right here.
I've been trying to read between the lines, and
The mic's not on.
that should be better now.
Batteries.
Okay. I can talk loud.
Just speak
Or you
loud.
can repeat it.
Do you want to repeat that question here?
Go ahead, Danielle.
So
No, go ahead, Danielle.
I am curious what your feelings are. I thought that when Israel started the ground invasion about the middle of October, I was expecting the Arab countries to come together and to oppose what Israel was doing. And I am wondering what your feelings are for why. I have some understanding of why. I think it's because of an atomic threat. But I thought that we would create a stalemate by the Middle Eastern countries coming together and standing against what is happening. So I'm curious what your feelings are for why that hasn't happened even until now.
Okay, hopefully I can repeat that, not just for you, but for the sake of the recording. Danielle wants to know when the ground invasion started in Gaza, why other Arab countries did not coalesce to create a coalition and thus possibly create a stalemate. Is that?
I especially expected it from Hezbollah.
And I especially expected this from Hezbollah. Maybe you want to start, Mr.
I will start. I'm trying to be politically correct. The thing you have to understand is that people that were put in power in the Arab countries, a lot of the Arab countries, right? Not all of them, but a lot of them, are proxies of the Western world, right? There are people that you can buy. And because you can buy them, you can tell them to heal and don't do anything, right? The way I see it, as a Lebanese, as an Arab, and as a Muslim, this was the biggest traitorship that I've ever seen. They did not even think twice to say, you know what, we're going to jump up and we're going to stop this, and then we can politically or have a conversation before anything happens. No. Month happened, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 15 months, over 58,000 dead. Murder, not dead. Murder. And that did not instigate in them, we should get up and do something. They shut down the streets in Jordan. I'll give you an example. In Jordan, people went to the streets. They said, we don't care what you do. You do what you want to do as a government. Open the borders, we will go and liberate it ourselves. They wouldn't do that. People literally marched in Jordan to the borders, and they were going through and removing mines from the ground and saying, we're going to go in. Then the Jordanian military came and stopped all of that, and they arrested people. And that was happening not just in Jordan. It was happening in Jordan, it was happening in Egypt, it was happening across the countries. The unfortunate part was the biggest ones, such as Saudi Arabia and UAE. I'm going to say it, and I'm being held accountable for it, but they are traitors, and traitors not just to the cause, but they are traitors to the core, because they think it's okay to put your hand with your enemy. It is not okay when your enemy is slaughtering your own people. So that's how I view it, and this is why they did not go forward with it. They were afraid that they will be pulled into some kind of a regional war. Everybody was scaring everyone. We don't want this to expand into a regional war. So expand it to a regional war, because enough is enough, right? People, and that's why they want to do it. They wanted to do it. In Lebanon, on why Hezbollah, you expected something better. Lebanon at that time, you got to remember, we didn't have a president. We were still we were being run by the parliament at that time, right? And the military asked Hezbollah to stand down as much as possible. And Hezbollah was still, actually, if you remember, from the south of Lebanon, they were hitting the north of Israel in hopes that they will detract troops from entering into Gaza, going up to the north. And that the problem is whenever you enter, the whole country is going to enter into war. And that's what we saw ended up happening with Israel encouraging and going into the south of Lebanon. And they realized that was a big mistake, right? I'm not pro-Hezbollah, to be honest, right? But I am, the way I see it, right? There's a saying in Arabic that says, أنا أخي على ابن عمي وابن عمي وأنا على الغريب, which means me and my brother are against our cousin, and me and my cousin are against the external powers, right? So for me, I see it as I'm not with them, but you can't be encouraging on our land. So if they're the only ones standing in your way, that's fine. And then them and us will have a conversation later on what they did is wrong or what was going on, and right, there will be repercussions, but that's internally between us. It doesn't have to come externally. But that's what also Hezbollah did not come in because they know there will be repercussions, and we did see some of that repercussions when they went into Lebanon and they bombed almost most of southern suburbs of Beirut, which is, I'm very lucky that my family survived it all, to be honest. So.
He added one point to that, and that is, within the Arab world, the feeling of solidarity with the Palestinians of injustice is also a feeling of solidarity of injustice that's happening to the people in the Arab countries. As I was mentioning earlier, the governments in the Middle East have one objective, and that's to stay in power. And I think the solidarity or the protests that was shut down in the different Arab countries, I think they were afraid that that might swell up, and then they themselves become a target of this anger. Therefore, they will replace these governments. Sisi is the first example of this. Really, it was completely shut down, any dissent or any support of the Palestinians within Egypt for that purpose. These governments are incredibly shaky, yet they're using their maximum power to stay in power. That's pretty much it.
If I may add that shortly after, first of all, I personally condemned what Hamas did in Israel on October 7. Within hours, I wrote articles and I went on social media and I gave speeches because I don't believe in violence, because violence brings violence. And that action caused this terrible massacre. But within weeks, the United Nations General Assembly had 141 countries, governments, out of 193 governments who are members of the United Nations. 141 supported the creation of a Palestinian state and condemned Israel's overreaction in Gaza. Now, since then, the figures have gone more. But even the West Europeans are condemning what Prime Minister Netanyahu's government is doing. However, the United States is in charge. The United States is the largest country with the biggest military. Most of those Arab countries don't. They're under the control of the US economically, militarily, politically. And if you remember in 1997, almost 30 years ago, a group of Americans founded this organization called the Project for the New American Century. And these people said, oh, we have now defeated Soviet communism, and Chinese are under our control. This is 30 years ago. They are dependent on us economically. We've got our factories there. They're producing most of our goods in China, so they are under our control. And Europe is our ally. There are 7 countries in the world, Islamic majority countries, who are against the Israeli government, who are speaking against the Israeli government, therefore critical of US government. We either have to overthrow their governments, or change them, or bring them under control, or attack them militarily. What were the 7 countries? There is plenty of document. Go online and check it. 7 countries were Somalia, Sudan, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran. The only one that's still left is Iran. And I say the only reason that Iranian government is still there is because of their military power. Otherwise, the whole concept of the new Project for the New American Century is, if you read their document, their manifesto, it says, we have defeated communism. We are the sole unipolar power of the world. Everybody should be under our control, including Europe, Germany, France, Britain. Anybody who's against us, we're going to overthrow. And there they came, the wars after 9/11. And when President Bush invaded Iraq, the plans were, according to all kinds of experts, to also attack Iran. I still don't know why they didn't attack Iran at that time, but I read in Time magazine at that time that Iran had 11,000 military sites, most of them underground, back then. Maybe that's why they didn't attack it. So there's only Iran, which is the troublemaker for US foreign policy. But unless we change the American foreign policy, we are not going to get anywhere. America is still the largest military power, the largest economy. It'll be decades before China really catches up to control the world the way the United States does. Most Americans want peace. Most Americans like you, even the conservatives and the Republicans, I've been in this country 57 years, and I became an American by choice. Nobody forced me. I wasn't a refugee, economic or political or war refugee. I liked America. That's why I became a citizen, because I figured we could work within the United States to change its foreign policy, to create a new world based on equality, based on role modeling, based on doing good things like it has to some extent, and get away from this deep state group that wants just military approach and force for everything.
Sorry, I'm just saying one more thing. Is that okay?
When your leg twitches, I know you have something to say.
I just wanted to add that there are some countries that refrained from entering, such as Qatar and Kuwait. Right? There are countries that actually refrain from entering. And the reason behind it is, this happens every time, and every time somebody intercedes, then it's like, oh my God, everybody's against us. That's how Israel plays the victim. So this time around, a lot of them said, and including Lebanon, said, we're not going to intervene. We're going to go the legal route, and we're going to tell the people, look, what's happening. We're not even intervening. They're doing this all on their own. Right? So you also got to add that to the equation. It's a complicated equation of why that didn't happen, but what's happening is not a complicated thing, and the solution is not a complicated solution.
We said we would end by 1:45. Are you okay with one more question? Okay.
Oh, good. You got a bunch at our table.
The woman in the purple and white.
Unfortunately, I got like 3 questions. You don't have to answer them all. You could choose 1 or 2, whatever. One question I had is, how did the Palestinians get through the wall in Israel? That is the most protected wall, and the official people are out there within seconds, literally, if anything goes wrong. The fact that they got in through that wall, was there with their military equipment, with tanks? There's something wrong with that picture. If you could better explain that, I appreciate it. And I don't know if I understood correctly on this or not, but I thought you said that Cuba supported Israel, maybe before the revolution, but I can assure you the Cuban Revolution has never, ever supported what Israel has done to Palestine, ever. I'd like to know if somebody could explain the phone situation, exploding phones in Lebanon. Where did they come from, and who's behind that? The last question is, why doesn't Iran put the finishing touches on their bomb? Because that would be a real deterrent for Israel to do anything. Right now, they can attack Israel, bomb them, and Iran isn't really finished with the bomb to fight back. Okay, those are my questions.
Well, I hope you're going to get away from bombing and military solution, but unfortunately, especially with the advent of Ukraine war 3 years ago, we're going back to 2014 when the first Russian invasion of Ukraine took place. the whole emphasis is on military solution by the people who control the US foreign policy, and therefore that is creating reactions. Iranian people are under severe economic hardship. People in Syria, look what they've gone through. They've lost millions of people.
Well,
Almost
Assad
half
was a
of the
good
population have been displaced. People in Lebanon, look what money is going toward military and weapons and purchasing weapons and building weapons instead of doing something to improve the lives of the people, and more important, to fight climate change and pollution and all that. So the question is, unless we change the American foreign policy, unless we get to President Biden and President Trump, and I've tried all my life, and that's very, very difficult, but we need to get groups like these form coalitions with other groups so that we can be some kind of a power in terms of voting. Now, right now, the situation is really dangerous, because if Iran is attacked, they could develop their bomb and throw it. And then what will happen? Israel would respond, the whole Middle East, the whole world would get in a nuclear war. And the same, you know, all these American generals and military people who say, oh, we got to defeat Putin. You're not going to defeat Putin. Putin will throw a nuclear bomb over Ukraine before he accepts defeat. This whole concept of winning and defeating is bad. Nobody's going to win this war. This war has gone for 3 years. It's going to go on more. It's the Ukrainian people who are being sacrificed, and the Russian young people who are being sacrificed. We got to get away from that mentality of military solution. We are in 21st century. Now, the question is, but how do we have these people in power? Because they're there for their economic interests, as it was referred by these gentlemen. The US is not there. Jimmy Carter, who passed away, is being blamed for losing Iran, for telling the Shah of Iran to leave. But he's the only, after John Kennedy, who talked about it and tried it, Jimmy Carter was the only one who made human rights as a cornerstone of American foreign policy, and he was constantly ridiculed for. And now he's in the past. He's considered, you know, an idealist. Now, we are going to get into more trouble. What has happened, the Ukraine war, and now even more so with the Gaza war, the whole world is lining up against the United States. We have BRICS organizations set up by China, India, Russia, South Africa, Brazil. They form an economic group which is bigger than G7 group under the control of the United States. What is happening, the whole world is getting angry at Americans, and I worry, because I don't want any of those autocratic groups. I don't want China to become the superpower of the world. I'd like to see a multipolar world where we get along and respect, and through ingenuity, science, creation, creativity, like America has done to a great extent, we become the leader of the world. We stay the leader of the world and then have them compete with us, not war with us. That is going to be destructive. We don't have time and resources, and we are running out of time environmentally. We are putting our resources into warfare. Well, very soon we're going to get to the point of no return environmentally. Thank you.
The phones, is that what you're going to talk about?
I was going to try to answer all 4. Ready? Ready? It's going to be a fast one. Ready?
Okay.
Okay.
He's going to try to answer all 4.
All right. How was Hamas able to cross the wall and get into that area? There's a lot that can go into that, but I will leave it into, I think, 3 points. 1, the ego of Israel. They thought they own it, they know it, nobody can dare to do it. 2, the undermining of what Hamas leadership can do. Right? They have really smart people that are really educated, that really know how to do the things that they needed to do. Right? And 3, it was because, and that is speculated. It was done on purpose in order for them to do what they wanted to do, to take over Gaza all over again. As for the Cuba part, I did not hear that. I don't know where it came.
I don't think anyone said that.
Okay, yeah. So, as for the exploding phones, this made me so infuriated and mad at the world because nobody stood up and said a single darn thing to Israel around this. They infiltrated the sovereignty of a nation. How they were able to do it is very simple. They got phones that they know that some militants of Hezbollah use, and pagers that they believe these are the pagers that Hezbollah use. Now again, it's important that they believe that the Hezbollah, militants use. Then they set up a proxy over Hungary. Thank you. I was trying to remember the name of the country. They set up in Hungary under a false company that has nothing to do with the actual company that sells those pagers. And they rerouted in there. They put the explosives inside of them.
Who's they?
Israel.
Israel, okay.
Yeah, so Israel put the explosives in them, then shipped them back, sold them to the Lebanese market. Now, this is important. They sold them to the Lebanese market. They didn't sell them to, we have our client, Hezbollah needs 50,000 of these, and they gave him those. No. They just flooded the market in hoping that it ends up with Hezbollah militants, and then they just sent the code, and then boom, it goes.
Thank you, that's interesting.
Yeah, which it's important to note that I have friends that are nurses and doctors that got affected by this. Their pagers, they have nothing to do with any political faction at any point. They're just doctors and nurses, and they got affected by that. And innocent people got affected by that. But that's how they did it. They flooded the market with those things that they believed that Hezbollah would end up in Hezbollah, which majority of it did, but that's still not an okay thing to do. As for Iran, actually, I'm not going to answer that one because I think he answered it in a better way, and don't want to extend it any longer.
And about the Cuban Revolution, never supported Israel.
Yes,
Actually, that's
no.
not true. Up until '67, Cuba had diplomatic relations with Israel, and they had good relations.
Until you're saying 67.
Up to '67.
We might have had diplomatic relationships with them, and they never supported them against the Palestinians.
Well, they had trade and
Trade?
trade relations, and they were never on either side. They were neutral.
Fine.
Take over.
Okay. Well, Mazen?
No, I was just going to say thank you for having us.
Well, if I may say a couple of things, a lot of you know who Seymour Hersh is. He's an American journalist. He happens to be Jewish, and he's in his 80s. He became famous for exposing some terrible things going back to My Lai massacre and Abu Ghraib prison tortures in Iraq. He wrote an article which is online on their Substack, the Substack online newspaper. Talks about what happened on October 7th. I'd like you to read that. And not that I'm not saying everything he says is a law or word of Bible, but it's illuminating. And we've had great Americans talk about what could have gone wrong. Was there a conspiracy? Or was there looking the other way and let it happen? For example, why did Prime Minister Netanyahu order 1,600 out of 2,400 border security guards, Israeli border security guards, guarding the border between between Gaza and Israel? Why did he order 2/3 of them, 1,600, to go to Jerusalem to be in a folk festival, and only 800 remained there when the attack happened?
Yep.
I mean, there are questions like that.
Yep.
Why were the warnings of the Egyptian security chief to Israeli security chief that Hamas was up to something? Why were they ignored? The question is, Was it overconfidence? Was it neglect? I don't know. I haven't seen the evidence. We'll probably never know. But there are some questions to be answered. Who wanted this war? Who's benefiting from this war? Obviously, Israeli people are suffering too. Economically, I just read that about 600,000 to 700,000 Israelis have left the country. Look at the economic damage. And Israel has had a relatively large number of its soldiers getting killed. So Israelis didn't want this war, no matter what their politics was. The question is how to prevent it. How, first of all, bring it to an end, how to prevent it in future.
If we all had the answer to that, we have a merrier holiday, whatever the holiday would be. Thank you once again, all three of you, and thank you for the questions.